Are we live now?
Yes. Good afternoon, all of you. I hope you enjoyed your lunch, and it's another day, another session. So welcome back to the Tangled Bank series. Next talk is by Dr. Gururaja KV. He is going to talk on frogs, the amphibian diversity, especially in our Western Ghats and other regions. So it's going to be a very exciting talk. And to remind you all, we have forthcoming talks in this series is 5 o'clock today evening by Kailash Chandra. He is going to talk on animal diversity. And tomorrow at exactly 11 a.m., Varad Giri is going to talk about snakes. So it's going to be a very exciting talk series. And thank you all for coming and joining. And to introduce Dr. Gururaja, he is a very well-known, herpetologist, and he's working on amphibians for quite some time. He is a faculty member and researcher at Srishti Manipal Institute of Art, Design, and Technology in Bangalore, India. Dr. Gururaja has worked for many years as a postdoctoral fellow and guest scientist at Center for Ecological Sciences at Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. He joined a very famous lab called Gubi Labs as a chief scientist in 2015 and as an adjunct scientist there. His current research is in the fields of amphibian ecology, behavior, and landscape ecology. Gururaja supports a citizen science program, Frog Watch India, and instrumental in an in situ conservation program called Batracharium. So I'm sure he's going to talk more about Batracharium as well as the citizen science program. And according to me, I knew Dr. Gururaja through a wonderful app called Frog Find. This is available in the Android as well as iPhone. I suppose I'm using Android phone, and I'm a big fan of this Frog Find app. It's a fantastic app. It enables the user to to know which kind of frog is that. All you have to do is just click a snap a frog. It's like plant snap up of the American botanical society. The plant snap is also just like that. You just click photo of a plant or a a flower, you will identify exactly which species is that. Just like that, this also works fantastic. It works, I suppose it works on the Google reverse image search. I'm not sure. Perhaps Gururaja will explain more on this point. And yes, Frog Find is a product developed by Gururaja and his team. So he has described 3 novel breeding behavior in frogs and 21 new species of frogs from the Western Ghats and 2 new fish species. So he's a very well-known and very productive taxonomist. We are really happy to have you here, sir. And Dr. Gururaja is also an awardee of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology of the Cornell University on bioacoustical analysis using Raven Pro in 2018. And he has awarded Karnataka State Biodiversity Award for Excellence in 2016 and Geospatial Excellence Award for the Frog Find Android app developed in 2014. So I am, this is exactly what I was telling you, the Frog Find. I strongly suggest everybody, whoever loved your nature, to download this app. This is available free of charge. So I'm just stopping my screen share and welcome you, sir, Dr. Gururaja here. Yes, over to you, Dr. Gururaja.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Yes, welcome to this our Tangled Bank series.
Perfect. Thank you, Felix. Thank you, Vinay, for this wonderful opportunity. Thanks, Felix, for the amazing introduction. Thanks a lot. I have heard last 3 talks on Tangled Bank. They have been excellent. I hope I do justice on talking about frogs. Since I thought looking at the audience data that you provided, they are PhD students. I have not covered Batracharium and citizen science part, but I will be able to discuss about it at the fag end of my talk. What I will do right now is I will share my screen and yep, that's the screen. I hope it's
visible.
visible.
Perfect.
Yep.
Yes.
And this is the slideshow. Yep. Okay. So this is what I will be talking about. It's on behavioral ecological research in Indian amphibians. Because diversity-wise, we have so many species, but it's only in the last 20 years we have started looking beyond taxonomy and trying to understand what is happening over there. So let me begin quickly with this particular movie clip. I hope the video is also visible. Yeah, perfect. So the frog did something there very unique. It was croaking at the same time. It was also showing off its hind limb, like a stretch exercise. It will do one more time now, if you can see here. Yeah. So this is what I'll be dealing with in today's talk. So the overview is something like this. What is there, what we are doing with Indian amphibians, and what is my work which I'm trying to cover today. Okay, so the moment we say frogs, this is what you probably will be able to hear. There is a background sound that is coming, that's the frog calls. This is recorded from the field. You can see a glimpse of diversity of amphibians that we have. If you ask me what are the most beautiful creatures in Indian biodiversity, I would definitely say frogs, not birds. Even though I started from birds pretty early in my high school days, but the switchover has changed me a lot in looking at these creatures for their colors, the kind of eyes they have, and for the kind of behavior they exhibit. So let's move on. Just to give glimpses where amphibians have evolved on Earth way back. It's called late Devonian period, something like 360 million years ago. They have evolved from Archaeopteryx fishes. So the fins in the front limbs have modified into front hand and their hind limbs. So this is an artistic impression of Tridobatrachus, which is one of the oldest fossil known in amphibians. And recently we also got one fossil from Antarctica. We'll discuss about that in the later stages. So the history is amphibians are there 360 million years ago. And to give a reference, we are here 2 lakh years ago. That's all. So we can see the difference between a species which has originated something like 360 million years ago. Okay, so coming to the world of amphibians, the global diversity based on amphibian species of the world by Frost et al. 2020. It's an online database. People who are interested in looking at database, what species have been described, they can go to this particular website listed at the bottom right corner. We have about 8,177 species belonging to these 3 orders. So Amphibia is a superclass, as you know, and it has 3 orders. An order called Anura, which is absence of tail. Chordata, which has a tail, looks like gecko or a house lizard, but they are not, because they don't have scales and their fingers on the front hand is only 4. And then one other order called Sicilians. They look like earthworm, but they are not earthworm because they have a backbone and annular rings around their body. So this is the diversity. And looking at their distribution, if I go by, Anurans are distributed almost all over the world, except for Arctic regions, Sub-Saharan Africa, and some of these cold areas. Uh, Earlier, I used to tell that there is no species from Antarctica, but 2020, we have a new find of a fossil from Antarctic region. So I had to deliberately now leave out Antarctic from this. And then Sicilians are, majority of them are temperate regions. They are in the temperate regions. Exception is the Amazonian forest. And then Sicilians are tropical in nature. So this is how their distributions are. Coming to amphibian diversification in the world, this was paper by Roylance et al. In 2007 in PNAS. So you can see that the species have diversified in a very diverse manner, and thanks to the kind of vegetation evolving on the land that provided more habitats for these species to evolve simultaneously. If you go through this paper, you will also simultaneously see that the rate of diversification in amphibians actually got exponential when there was evolution of angiosperms on the land surface. So coming to Indian amphibian history, we have a great history of the continental movement, starting from Indian subcontinent itself, when it started separating from the Gondwana landmass and started moving slowly, and then it finally docked to the Eurasian plate. During this journey, there were a couple of, there's one species as of now, or two species as of now, which are called pig-nosed frogs. They are one of the example for biotic ferry model. That means they stayed inside this supercontinent kind of stuff, and it stayed even now. And there are some species after docking to Eurasian plate moved into India. These are the species of toads, like this one particular toad, which is Pidostypes tuberculosis. And there are some species which moved out of India, which are like the bush frogs. The pictures are there. Right. So we have all this story, nice story to build on Indian phylogeography. And we have probably history of 60 to 70 million years in amphibian world. So coming to the diversity of species that we have in India, so this number varies quite widely. Some papers say 445, some papers say 455. It all depending on the distribution pattern that we have seen. Let us say that it's around 450 species what we have, and majority of them are all anurans. Anurans are nothing but frogs and toads. And only two species of salamanders we have, or newts we have, Himalayan newt. And then there are 40 species of Sicilians. So all these things belong to some 3 orders, 16 families, and I think 71 genera. If I move further into this, what is more fascinating in looking at the discovery pattern is that the last 20 years, if you consider the cutoff as year 2000, and if you see up to 2020, the discovery has been tremendous. It's like 40% of Indian amphibian diversity has been discovered in last 20 years. It also gives us new insight why this is happening, probably because of our way of teaching about amphibians. And it's also because of the enthusiasm that we have, in addition to the technical or technological advancement that we have in this particular field, be it molecular phylogeny, be it bioacoustics, or the kind of field gears that we have now to not to fear any forest. We can venture into any kind of forest, and that's probably the reason why we have so much of species being discovered in the last 20 years. It's 200 new species. Sadly, though, it's good in one sense that we have 455 species, but on the other hand, our research is more predominantly on taxonomy or phylogeny. We are not going anywhere beyond looking beyond taxonomy, and that's a bit tragedy here. But at the same time, it also provides you a lot of opportunity to look beyond taxonomy. So species have been described. So let us figure out why it is there, what is happening to it, what kind of signals it provides. All these things gives a new opportunity for people to look into. And if you count number of researchers in India, we are hardly 20 or 25, and we are looking at a large landscape. Anyway, coming to some of the ancient amphibians that we have, the oldest one, as I initially pointed out, is Nyctibatrachidae, or the pig-nosed frog. Followed by that, there are two families. One is called Myctrixalis, and the other one is called Nyctibatrachidae, or Myctrixalidae and Nyctibatrachidae families. And we also have another interesting family called Ranixalidae. So in 2007, when Rollins wrote, it was a subfamily called Ranixalinae, but now it is upgraded to a family, Ranixalidae. So these are the four major families that we have in India, which are very ancient. Apart from that, we have many more. I'm not going to deal with that. Why I'm trying to touch upon this are, this is where I started my career with working on Nyctibatrachidae, not for the liking, but for its calling behavior and then parental care it exhibits. So I will start the journey with Nycticalidae as today. So I was recording somewhere in 2004 in Western Ghats in a broad daylight. I will show that movie clip later on. So there was an interesting behavior in this particular frog, which was actually stretching its hind limb and showing off both the hind limbs, actually, one at a time. And I was unable to understand what it's actually doing. I thought it's something like how we stretch when we are stressed. But later on, it didn't stop in one or two go. It was repeatedly happening. So then I said, okay, there must be some behavioral thing associated with it. And it took probably something like 9 years before I published a paper on why it is actually stretching its hind limbs. I will come to that again in quite a few slides. So among Nycticalidae, my first important contribution in this family is rediscovering a species which was discovered way back in 1937 by Rao. There was Coimbatore Raghavendra Narayan Rao, who was in Central College, Bangalore. He described from Kempole in Hassan. It was called elegant dancing frog. So then there was no report in the middle, and we rediscovered it in 2010 along with KP Dinesh from ZSI and SD Biju from Delhi University. So it was a tiny creature. Again, why I want to bring this here is that when I was looking at this species even before, I was thinking that this is a subadult of a species. It's only later on when I started reading the paper and trying to understand what is happening with the length or size of the species, then I started figuring out there are in India there are species which are which can sit on the thumbnail, as small as that, right? So that's the opening of my thinking about amphibians, and thanks to this particular rediscovery, and later on with SD Biju, I was able to describe 14 new dancing frogs, which is one of the remarkable discovery in a single paper. Because we were able to look through all the diversity across Western Ghats to figure out what kind of species we have. So with the discovery of 14 species, Nycticalidae becomes a family with 24 species in it. And I particularly focused on one species during my PhD program. This is Nycticalus saxicola at that point in time, we said. It perhaps, if you look at the genetic aspects of it, it now goes and matches with that of Nycticalus cotigarensis. So what I did was I looked into some 6 localities in the Western Ghats and trying to figure out what happens in a habitat where Nycticalus is found versus what happens to the ecological variables where it is not found. These are a couple of statistical tables just to show that there are ecological variables too that determines the presence of a species. Okay, so let's jump into understanding Nycticalus behavior. So if you have to keep my watch on. So that's how it actually calls. But when you look at something more than call, this was recorded in 2004. I used a Sony DSE normal camera. I was able to showcase one of the important phenomena over here. So it sets this one of the leg, left leg, and then the other one also responds by stretching its right leg, and they both stand side by side, and then they start kicking each other. So initially, when I observed this, I was so mesmerized seeing that such a wonderful phenomenon, and I was thinking that this is for sexual selection, like whoever wins the race is going to get the female. So look at the behavior over there. The male stretches, the other male also stretches, and then they kick each other. So this particular phenomena took 6 years for me to figure out why this was happening. And at the time, I joined hands with two researchers from University of Vienna, Austria, Dr. Doris Springer and Professor Walter Hudel, who were, except for the Western Ghats species, who have seen the species across globe. So they have looked at Leptodactylidae members, Myobatrachidae members, Hylidae members, and Ranidae members across South America, Australia, and Asia, but they haven't looked into Myctrixalidae. So they were looking at the species in India, and so at that point in time, I was introduced to them by Dr. Karthik Shankar and Vijay Kumar. So they provided greater insights in this particular behavior. So what happens in almost all the foot flagging frogs? These are the other foot flagging frogs across the world. So they do it for different purposes. For example, Stuarois latopalmatus, which is one of the famous species from the Bornean forest, what it does is it actually makes a pick kind of sound and then stretches both its hind limb, because there is a background noise which is so noisy that if it croaks, it is not heard by the female. So the idea of Stuarois is to get the attention of the female and then to show off its hind limb and then to attract the mate, and then the mate preference happens. So I thought it's the similar way with Myctrixalis, and that's what I discussed with Doris and Walter Hudel. But they came up with a new idea saying that it may not be the same case. If I show you these images, this is from Bornean Islands, and look at the streams. They are very rough, very noisy streams. So what we did was then we did a project together, and it still continued to happen. We have a National Biodiversity Authority permission to carry out the collaborative work in the Western Ghats. And this is the stream in Katlekan where we started our work way back in 2010 and 11. And then if you look into these streams, you can see that these are the patches where one can look at the dancing frog, the Kotkara dancing frog. This is as much as 30 individuals in a given area, kind of. So that's the amount of abundant individuals we have. Sorry, I'll come here. Sorry. Yeah. So if you look at the variation, there are a lot of variation in their color, but they are all same species. Nothing to worry about. The color variation making a new species or different species. They are all same species. They are called Myctrixalis kotikara or Kotikara dancing frog, and approximately they weigh about 1.1 gram. And so what we did was initially, what we started doing was we compared what happens in Stuarois latopalmatus. This is the call. So there is a background sound. So unless you do a spectrogram or a Fourier transformation of the amplitude, you will not be able to understand where the sound is. These small dots are the spectrogram of the sound. Whereas if you play the sound of dancing frog from India, the Myctrixalis kotigarensis, you can clearly see the sound spectrogram. So what is actually happening over there? So it was clear for us based on the videos and the analysis we did, latopalmatus was more for getting the attention of a mate and then doing the foot flagging, whereas dancing frog in India, the Western Ghat, is not for the same reason. So we did some kind of activity budgeting. Do not worry about these error bars because we have loads of individuals over there, number of observation per individuals. You can see that it goes up to 2,500 kind of stuff. But what you need to really figure out here is that the activity is more during the day between 7 o'clock to 11 o'clock. Their calling and foot flagging behavior is more. So as in the afternoon, like late afternoon, kind of between 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., again, their activity actually increases. So we were trying to understand, so this must be a kind of visual communication rather than just vocal. And that is when we started doing more analysis. So what we did was we tried to figure out whether this vocal sac is also kind of acting as a visual cue. So we played both acoustic as well as vocal. So you can see here, we simply played a vocal recording or the acoustic recording. So how the frog behaves. When we played with the vocal sac kind of stuff, So how the amphibian, like how the individual responds to it. So in addition to that, we also measured using pen spectrometer what are the kind of spectrum of wavelength that it exhibits. So it's not in the foot webbing, not in the back of the frog, or not in the habitat background there are any color variations, but it's in the vocal sac you can see the entire spectrum of colors. So it is very clear now for us that it's not just the leg, it's also the vocal sac which actually acts in this visual communication. It is not just vocal alone. So what we did unimodal analysis, just playing the sound and looking at how for the playback what the response comes from, and then we did multimodal playback for which we also measured the response. So you can clearly figure out from this graph that it's the multimodal playback for which the males respond. Then we looked at male-male agonistic behavior, trying to figure out if two males are kept in the same place, how do their behavior changes. So then we called one as a resident individual and the other one as an intruder, and trying to see whether there is any variation. The variation between them were very, very minimal. There is not much variation. And we also try to figure out whether there is a winner or loser and whether that has any difference. For our surprise, there was no difference at all. In fact, winner had done activities much less compared to a loser. So it was very clear for us in a way that this was not meant to attract a mate. It was more of defending their territory. And that's what we were able to finally say, that a frog does its foot flagging to say that I own that particular stone and no other frog should come onto that particular stone. And in order to say that, it first actually croaks, then it stretches its hind limb, and then even after that, if the male comes into that place, they kick each other. So this is what we were able to tell. This is very much contradictory to whatever films that you see and saying that, oh, dancing frog dances and then then it attracts a mate. That's not the case here. So dancing is for territorial maintenance. Okay, so I followed this particular behavior and I could able to go up to what happens at the end of the day. Let us say after this behaviors and all, whether the male gets a mate or not. He finally gets, but it is not relevant whether it's a winner or a loser. There are a couple of instances where there was a sneaky male who was able to get the female. So all the hypothesis of female selection and mate selection is all proven wrong over here. So the sneaky male, once he gets the female, then the female starts moving to a shallow part of the stream. We can also see a small video over here. And what she does is that she makes a cavity in a shallow stream. It's a highly energy expensive activity. She makes a small cavity over there. You can see the male on the back, the female over there. And then she puts herself inside and releases the eggs over there. And then finally, she also does a great dance called the covering dance. So she covers the clutch of egg with small stones around it. And perhaps because of all these kind of behavior, we in 2004, we called it as dancing frog. Because it's not just the male who dances here, it's also the female who does these kind of dances. And then we had some questions regarding why this happens and all. This is the question we are still working on. Why this particular dancing frog is trying to breed below the ground and putting the eggs inside the stream. And Biju came up with the tadpole description of these dancing frogs. Yeah, as you can see that they were all burrowed inside the sand and they look very very much like snakes. So it is this character that makes dancing frog very unique, and their habitat's also very unique, because if you take away the sandy portion of these streams, there is no breeding ground for dancing frogs. So the conservation measures, when people ask me why you need streams or why you need Western Ghats, these are the indicators. Like if you lose those habitats, this particular species will never have a habitat to breed, or it might take another thousands of years to evolve to a new or different habitat. Then I move on to Nyctibatrachidae. That's where I started my career in my master's. So I described a species in my first year of PhD, and we called it as Nyctibatrachidae husseini. and then it became Nyctibatrachus karnatakensis. There is a great story behind that entire change in the nomenclature. I will keep it for another talk, not for today, because it deals with a lot of taxonomic issues and the ego issues that we have every day with researchers. I will try not to discuss about that in this particular talk. So again, I worked on the habitat characters, ecological issues of Nyctibatrachus. I will move on. So coming to Nyctibatrachidae, this is unlike Micrixellus. Micrixellus is entirely endemic to Western Ghats, whereas Nyctibatrachus, it has three genera. Two of them are endemic to Western Ghats, whereas one of the genus is restricted to Sri Lanka, which is Lankanectus. Overall, we have 39 species in this particular family, among which 37 are endemic to Western Ghats. So this Astrobatrachus was described in 2018. This is a new genus in this particular family. So what is interesting is that in Nyctibatrachus genus, there are 36 species, which are as small as 12 mm to as large as 85 mm. So you can have a species that can sit on your fingernail to a species that can occupy your entire palm. So that's the kind of variation we have. At the same time, we also have something called mountain-associated clade endemism. This was done by Boxleyer in 2012. What she says is in her work, she and her team member says is that each of the hills range in the Western Ghats have unique clade of Nyctibatrachus. So for example, this Senkota Gap to Palghat Gap, you have a particular group of Nyctibatrachus. Then from there to Goa Gap, you have a particular group of frogs. And from Goa Gap further on, you have a particular group of frogs. So this again gives us why so much of diversification has happened and what are the reasons. Like it is still not clear what are the reasons, but this diversification is associated with the mountain formations. So that's a great question for the coming generations to work, like why such kind of clade endemism happens. Whether it's the behavior of the species that determines it, we will see that later. So I also worked on tadpole description with Preeti. So there were no descriptions of Nyctibatrachus tadpoles earlier. We were able to use molecular markers to figure out how to differentiate that. And another break in my career, I can say, came in 2014 when we described this mud packing frog. So you can see that there's one particular individual, this is a male individual. He's standing on his foot and trying to touch a twig over there. I will show the video so that that becomes very clear what it's happening over there. So this is described as Nyctibatrachus kumbara now, or kumbara night frog. The male is here, the female is here. The female stands on her feet in the initial stages. She touches the place or the twig where she is likely to lay eggs, and then they get into an amplex position. That's the position where they sit on each other, or mounting position. They are in this position for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then female does a remarkable activity. She, along with male, puts her head into the water and then places her cloaca to the twig and releases all the eggs over there. And after placing the eggs, she slowly moves away from the place, but the male stays back. So that's the number of eggs. There are 8 eggs. And then the male comes back and she does a fabulous behavior called mud packing behavior. So he takes the mud from the stream and puts onto these eggs from all sides. And this activity goes for 20 minutes. Now, straightforward, this behavior was not studied anywhere else. And looking from honest signaling kind of thing, we had multiple questions. The first question is obvious. Why do the particular frog does the kind of activity it is doing? Is it to protect eggs? Or is it to save from predators? Or is it to save from desiccation? Or it's a kind of honest signaling to another female who is likely to breed in the next couple of days. So these are a couple of questions we raised in this work. Along with that, we also worked on whether if there are particular species in a same area, they have any kind of reproductive character displacement. So I worked on another 6 more species. This was a smaller species called Kempole night frog. And you can see that it's also in the same way. It does an amplexus, turns its heads down, and then places eggs, and the male comes back and touches all those eggs. This is the video. Sorry, I should have shown this first. How many more minutes I have, if I can ask? Oh, it's fine.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, no problem, Gururaja. Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so you can see that the female has laid the eggs, male is watching there, and there was another female who is ready to mate with the same male. So these 2 clutches of eggs are from these 2 females, right? And you also heard the call, how the Kempole was calling. So it is quite different. And then we have Nyctibatrachus jogue or jogue night frog. You can, if you are hearing this sound for the first time, you can confuse it for a bird call. That's the call it makes. Wow. Whereas even its breeding is completely different. You can see that male and female are almost of same size. And now instead of on a dry leaf on the floor, now this particular frog is capable of climbing onto twigs, trees, or even onto a leaf. And they breed on those kind of stuff. And you can also see the modification in the fingers. It is capable of clinging onto these walls or leaves kind of thing. And then I will show this particular movie so that it helps. So what happens is that you can see here, it's a male here, 2 females. So it has already fertilized, and this is something like 3 or 4 days old egg. And this particular mounting he is trying to do with this female, and eggs might come in this area. So this is how their behaviors are. Okay, and then I will move on to this. You have already seen. This is Nyctibatrachus kumbara. And then we have a couple more species from northern part of Western Ghats. One is Nyctibatrachus humayuni. Its call is like that. Right. And then you have Nyctibatrachus petraeus. This was discovered in 2005. The sound looks similar, and breeding also looks very similar. This is on a leaf. This is on a rock surface. So this really prompted us to look beyond what is happening. And if you go to Coorg, there is another species called Nyctibatrachus grandis, which is the largest among the Nyctibatrachus, which is about 85 millimeters. So this particular species, when it makes, this is the sound, and this is the number of eggs that it lays. This is the male guarding the egg, and it's very ferocious individual. So if you go closer, it will come with making a sound. So one part is looking at all this naturalistic behavior. That's a story one can tell. Now the other question for us was whether there is a reproductive character displacement, and we try to map it based on male and female size, number of eggs, and we try to plot it. We didn't find any pattern over there, but it has given us good insight on what kind of species lays what number of eggs, and what is the difference between male and female size. But when we did a non-metric multidimensional analysis on the characters of number of eggs, the parental care, the way they breed, the way they croak, what is the SVL ratios. So what we figured out is something similar to that of Darwin finches. For example, the species like Nyctibatrachus jogue, kumbara, and Kempole, they are in the same place. And look at their distinction, what happens. They form a different cluster altogether. And in the sense, when they are in the same habitat, their breeding behavior is different. When they are in different mountain hills, for example, Petraeus, jogue, and humayuni are northern part of Karnataka and in southern part of Maharashtra and Goa. So they are on different hill ranges, but their breeding behavior is similar. Similarly, looking at Nyctibatrachus grandis and kumbara, they are on 2 different regions, but the behavior seems to be very similar. This is a clear indication of reproductive character displacement. That means when the species are together, they have quite unique behaviors in their breeding. When they are in different hillocks, they are having similar kind of breeding behavior, like allopatric versus sympatric species. Sympatric will have different breeding behaviors. Allopatric species have similar kind of breeding behaviors. So the last session of my talk will be on reproductive characters in bush frogs. These are the only group of frogs in India as of now, what we know is that they don't have tadpole stages, and the tadpole stages happens within the egg clutch. In the sense, if you consider it's Nyctibatrachidae or any other species, or bufo or common, Dattaphragmus or Euphyctus, these species lay eggs, and eggs hatch into a tadpole, and tadpole metamorphoses in a stream, feeding on algal mats and all, and then metamorphoses to become an adult frog. Whereas in Rochester's group, they lay eggs, and the entire metamorphosis happens within the egg, and a tiny froglet emerges out of that egg. So that's why it is called direct development. And I was able to record this way back in 2006-7. That was my first observation. And then we found a new species in 2007, which was called Oaklandra bush frog. We named after a plant species for this particular frog species because it resides inside and breeds inside. What is unique in that is that there are 3 species now. One is Oaklandra, other one is Chalazodis, and the third one is Manohari. All 3 breeds within a bamboo clutch, and they croak from there, they breed from there, they lay eggs inside, they guard the eggs, and in some cases, as Sheshadri has worked on, a male of if it is not from the same, it has not parented the same egg clutch, they will come and feed on the egg clutches. So there are so many amazing breeding behaviors that we have in these frogs from the Western Ghats. So this is my concluding video clip on Oaklandra bush frog. So you can see nice starry eyes and the kind of sound it produces. And so is the case with many species in the Western Ghats. So if you look at 455 species, what we know, it's hardly 5%. So that means this entire world of amphibians within India is open for people to take it up. It can be PhD students, it can be master students, or it can be postdoctoral students. Figure out the question that you want to work on. The field is open for many of you to carve your own niche. So these are a couple of questions I have. Some of the proximal answers we are trying to figure out, some of the ultimate answers. We are working with Max Fuchsjäger and Doris on androgen receptor hormone and dancing frogs. These are in due course of time, probably 2-3 years down the line, we will be able to answer some of these questions. Yeah, so that's my team. Thanks to all these people who are able to help me in the field as well as in understanding behavior in frogs. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Guru. Wow, what a wonderful talk it is. It is like a virtual transportation to the Western Ghats and the world of frogs and frog behavior. The dancing frog and the frog, the hind leg behavior. I mean, that it came as a complete surprise for me. I never knew that kind of what would be the significance of that behavior. That the moving of the leg, and also the mud packing, for the parental care. So it is really curiosity driven, inspiring stuff that you spoke. It's absolutely wonderful. I totally enjoyed it.
Thank you.
So
yeah,
it was a very informative lecture.
Thank you.
We are not expert from this field, Dr. Gururaja, but still we are looking now ki it is a very, you can say, exploring area in which young researchers can work with a more new invention or discovery. So
Dr. Guru, you can exit the presenter window. You can just talk on the
Sure.
So right moment, I have a couple of the questions.
Please.
The first is that, as you discussed, we got many new species from the last 20 years. So it might be due to the technical advancement and the more resourceful persons diverted their career towards this to solve some specific problems. So what is the expectation in the next 20 years?
Wow, that's a fabulous question. So one of the key thing is to, first of all, is to open up for younger generations. Personally, I also feel that initially when I started, it is like, oh, he's a subject expert. Everything you should go and speak with him only. And if he doesn't say, he doesn't know answer, that means that's the end of it. But the trend has changed in last 10-15 years. People started asking questions, and that is what we should be promoting. Rather than having a set guideline saying in 20 years we are going to achieve this, I would say let it come from those who want to ask questions. Let us say I have got triggered by a particular behavior, or I have seen something in the field. So what is that I am observing? Whether it's just a natural history note kind of thing, or it has an answer for my evolutionary thinking. Whether this particular species has converged in its behavior from different continents in the similar kind of situation. So that's why it has developed a dancing behavior. So these kind of question can come from the person who asks it. So only thing I would prefer as a person who works on this field is to tell them to ask good questions. That's all. So I have no set of things. Say in 20 years, this is what we are going to achieve. Probably we can add 50 more species as taxonomists. But apart from that, I think ecology is a field which is completely open for another 450 species or so. So there are a lot of questions. I cannot list any of them as of now.
So you are working with the very unique trait of some specific frog species, that is the foot flagging.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
do you correlate this particular behavior with the age of the frog during?
We have not looked into that part. The moment what we have, as of now, what we have seen is that when the frog is capable of croaking, that means it has attained adulthood. And we are just in that particular window of saying what adult behaves. We have not seen, as you specifically pointed out, with the age, what happens with the flagging behavior or croaking behavior kind of thing. We just assume that a croaking individual is an adult, and how does it acts in the field? Like when there is another acting male over there, adult male over there, what it does. So that's what we have looked at. We have not looked into the age factor. It could be a great question.
So yeah, we have one question from a participant called Sherina Joy, and she would like to know, yesterday we got to know birds can be identified through their calls. Perhaps you might have heard of this talk by
Correct,
Manjari Jain.
correct. I
Can
heard.
the same applies to, can the same be applies to the frogs? So
Absolutely.
by the frog calls. Yes.
Absolutely. It is much more simpler. In birds, you have tonal variations and all. So you have a library kind of stuff for a particular species. Let us say, even if you have a mina, it could be some syllables of mina sound. Whereas in frog, it is very simple because it is repetitive. So even if you do analysis of 100 frogs, you will get a unique identification from them, because their signature, spectral signature, will remain same. It doesn't vary so much as that of a bird, right? So it's a good question. It is possible to identify each of the species. The thing is, right now we know probably 60 species, they're called records. Another 350 to go.
Right.
So there is a Dr. Mamtez Kumari. She asked a question. Sympatric species have different breeding behavior, and the allopatric species have same breeding behavior.
Yeah.
What is your point here?
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that in a same habitat, if there are multiple species, what happens is there can be a crossbreeding that can happen. There can be a competition for the resource. So in order to avoid this resource competition, so these species are capable of adapting to different breeding behavior. So Nyctibatrachus kumbara need not mate with Nyctibatrachus campolensis, or Nyctibatrachus kumbara need not mate with a Nyctibatrachus joe. And for that precise reason, they have this allopatric breeding behavior, which is quite different. Whereas, allopatric have similar kind of breeding, whereas sympatric have different kind of breeding. So allopatric happens similar kind of breeding because there is no competition between two species over there. Right? It is as simple as that. So they are in different hillocks. They don't have multiple species of the different kinds or similar kinds over there. So that's why they have not evolved into having a different kind of breeding behavior. Yeah.
Okay, so we have one question from Smita Krishnan. She's asking, can you explain chemical communication in amphibians? Isn't olfactory poorly developed in frogs?
We used to think like that till 10 years ago, thinking that frogs doesn't have good olfactory functions. But now the recent finding is that the vocal sac is not just visual communication. They have small glands in the vocal sac. Vocal sac is that balloon-like structure. So they have glands over there. When they vibrate, they leave out chemical signals. And the mates are capable of receiving these signals, and they move towards the mate. So there is a well-developed olfactory mechanism in frogs. And it is much more developed in caecilians and salamanders. They actually track the predator as well as the potential mate using the chemical signals. And there is a work in tadpoles, which is bicolored frog. You might have seen in rivers and streams large black tadpoles. They have kin recognition system. So they recognize their own brothers and sisters in the same school of tadpoles by touching each other and sensing the chemical. So that means they have a very good olfactory function, which we are now trying to understand what is happening, because our all understanding is that you go by some books and you stop there, right? Like frogs are not seen in after monsoon kind of, but you can see that. Only thing is you have to go and search them in the field. So you'll figure that out. It will not rain frogs. It will come from the ground itself when it rains. It's the same way. Yeah.
So other than the Western Ghat, which area has maximum potential for the frog research in India?
I would actually I wanted it to be opened up for entire India, but as of now, if you see, it's skewed in the sense the diversity is either in Western Ghats or in northeastern hill regions. Like you go to Arunachal, you go to Namdapa, all this stuff, and then say only 2 regions have more diversity. But if you look at the plains, the Deccan Plateau kind of thing, even they have at least 20-25 species. What we as of now know is this is a bullfrog, and we end there. But we really don't know whether it's the same species. We don't know what is the population structure, how they moved all over the place. So I would say, rather than focusing on the hotspot regions, we should actually open up for entire India and people to even look in the urban areas, to look in their backyard what kind of species they have. Because that gives us more insights on structure of these population of species.
Okay, we have a question from Sribin P from Kannur, Kerala. Sribin is very active, lots of questions. And one of his questions is how frogs finding suitable place for laying their eggs. So how do they find a suitable place?
Wow. So as of now, the understanding is that frogs are ectotherms. Like they don't have their own body temperature. They depend on the environment to maintain the temperature. So that is one of the reasons why they want moist places. And that is why it's also reason that you don't see frogs croaking in the broad daylight. They try to do all these things when the temperature is low and when they want to expend the energy less compared to the daytime. So when the monsoon hits India or the Western Ghats, when the rain is there, so that moment triggers the hormonal changes in frogs, and that is when they start croaking. With the croaking mate, or it's the male who croaks. Females generally respond to the croaking mate, and then female feels that okay, this is the time to reproduce, and they search in a potential habitat. It can be a pool, it can be a stream, it can be a moist place where the eggs can be held moist for at least 15 to 20 days. For example, if the frog finds a pool in the early showers of the monsoon, and if it lays all the eggs and there is no rain for next 2 months, all those eggs are going to die. They will not understand there is no rain in between. They think that that pool is going to be there for at least 15 days so that all the eggs will hatch into tadpoles. That is their primary like goal, kind of, to lay eggs in a moist place and ensure that the eggs hatch into tadpoles.
All right, so we have yet another question from is Trichum dendrobatidis, chytridius fungus, is a pathogenic fungus growing on the frog. So how can we help to save the frogs from these fungi? How can we conserve the endangered Panamanian golden frogs from the chytrid-like fungal infections? So that is a question.
So
yes.
we did not have to go up to golden frog. We in the Western Ghat itself, we have this fungus, and this has been recently reported by Karthikeyan Vasudevan and his team. The issue is that all these chytrid fungus, they work in a mechanism where the resistant mechanism of tadpoles are switched off. So when they grow into adults, there is no resistance within the body, and that is when fungus, which is naturally occurring fungus in the forest, they just attack the entire population and the population wipes out. So one of the way is to figure out where it is happening, and you can do a captive breeding kind of stuff. That is most preferred kind of conservation phenomena. The other thing is that they have done it in mountain chicken frog, where they try to spray chemicals on frogs, which is not going to kill the frog, but kill the fungus. So they tried that. When it comes to Western Ghats, again, none of these can work here because the fungus of Western Ghats are endemic to Western Ghats. It is not found in Panama. It's not found in the Europe. So it is a fungus which is from the Western Ghats, but it's still the chytrid fungus only. So what you can do is either test all these stuff or try to captive breed some of these species. But again, in order to do all these things, you need to know their ecology, which we don't know as of now. Right, whether it is dancing frog, or you give an example of critically endangered species like a Amboli bush frog. So what do we know about its ecology? So if we don't know the ecology, just bringing a couple of individuals and saying that I will breed them in my aquarium is not going to help or solve the problem. So what we need to know is we need to have a baseline information, and then on you can build a conservation program saying that, okay, we know this population is viable, this many eggs it lays, this is how the egg develops, this is how many days it requires, this is where it can be grown in the lab conditions kind of. So in order to do that, we have to build that baseline information, which we right now don't have. Other thing, as individuals who is going into forest can do is that don't catch any frog. Don't pose yourself with frogs in hand saying that, oh, this is a tiny, cute little creature I took and take a selfie kind of thing. Don't do it. Leave the frog in the habitat. You can take your phone, go closer and take a picture than disturbing it. Not to handle frogs. You can be the vector. Even though there is a clear evidence that within 2 minutes, the fungus dies in your hand. But I would definitely prefer not to handle any frogs in the field. That's one of the best way that as in India or in the Western Ghats, what we can do to control chytrid fungus and spreading from one frog to the other.
Dr. Gururaja,
yeah,
how could sequencing help to identify the different species of the frog at this moment?
Yeah, so as of now, what we use is mitochondrial DNA, 16S and 12S mitochondrial DNA. And we try to see there are given primers for the amphibians. So we try to figure out how much base pair differences are there. And we have a cutoff point, like 3% is the minimum difference that you require to say this is a different species. And if it is less than 3%, then we figure out other examples. For example, it can be vocalization difference, or it's the bone differences in osteology. Based on that, we differentiate frogs using molecular techniques.
Sorry. All right, we have one question from one Shikharani Datta, and she would like to know what will be the most likely to happen to the frog's eggs if we take from the freshwater pond and place it in saltwater aquarium.
Wow.
So yeah.
So that's a great question. Yeah. It also brings to this particular aspect that we have a lot of sea and ocean, like 70% of Earth is covered with ocean, but we don't have any frogs in the ocean. Why? It's the main reason. What happens is that we, whether it is frog or their eggs, they don't have any protective layers. Frogs don't have scales and all. That's why they are not in the sea. The eggs also doesn't have a protective layer like amnion. That's why it is not protected from salt water. What happens is it gets pickled, in the sense salt gets ingressed into the egg, and all the egg content will go off. So it will be squeezed or pickled kind of egg. So egg will not develop. So it will die off.
So we have one more question here from Dr. Mamtesh Kumari. What might be the reason for the difference in the skin color of member of the same species of frogs? Well, it's kind of, not really clear question, but still, is there any adaptation happening at the species level? Of the same species of frogs, why there is difference in the skin color?
Fantastic. So what happens in frog skin is that they have something called melanopores. Okay. It is same with us. So if you stay like last 2 months, if you have stayed in your home, when you go out, people will say you have bleached kind of, or your melanopores have closed so that you will get fairer. Your skin looks fairer. It's the same thing with frogs. So if they are from a canopied habitat, their melanopores would have closed and they look light colored. Whereas if they are in bright light, or if you have used flashlights to photograph them, within few minutes, they will turn into darker shaded frogs. So this is because of the melanopore activities in their skin. So melanophore, when it constricts, it becomes light colored. Melanopore, when it opens up, it becomes darker colored. That's the straightforward. Yeah.
So there is another question from the Sajila Sahajan. Some species of the amphibians accommodate different species of the pteromodes, parasites, even in a single host. Why?
Sorry. Come again. Last.
Yeah, some species of the amphibians accommodates different species of the pteromodes, parasites, even in a single host. Why?
Even in a single host. No, that second part I didn't understand. Like even in a single species, you said something.
Different species. Some species of the amphibians accommodates different species of the tremodes, parasites, even in a single host. So this is really tricky something question.
I don't know.
Yeah, no problem. It's okay. So there is again question from the Muzaffar Hassan. Why Western Ghats is rich in frog diversity?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are all trying to understand. It is probably related with the formation of Western Ghats, to the kind of vegetation we have, the kind of phenology, the number of rainy days, and these perhaps shape the diversification of species. We have something like microcontinent in Coorg, where many species have evolved, and you can see in one patch, you can see about 30 species in a go. Unlike if you go to a Deccan Plateau kind of thing, there's no vegetation, and the rainy days probably have reduced. Instead of 19 rainy days, it can be 30, 35 rainy days. And for that, some species might have adapted so that only those have survived, whereas others who have not adapted wouldn't have survived. So this is perhaps is the answer. But we are all trying to understand how it has shaped. So this is an ongoing journey. So I cannot straight away answer this, but this is how, whether you ask people from fish diversity group, whether you ask people from vegetation background or molluscan background, they will all tell you probably in the similar way. Because of the vegetation formation, because of the terrain, because of the seasonality aspect, you have more microhabitats in Western Ghats compared to drier areas. That's why species might have evolved more over there.
Well, we have one question from Ashutosh Kumar Sharma, and he would like to know what is the difference between toad and a frog.
Wow. At the molecular level, there's nothing. So frogs and toads are all same. But for the convenience, when we go into the field, what we have figured out is that frogs are moist in their skin, and they are slimy to touch, whereas toads have something called parotid glands behind their back over here next to their eye, which has toxins. When predators hold them, the toxins are released, and then when you touch them, they look like sandpaper. So you can feel the roughness when you hold a toad. And toads are generally moving towards terrestrial environment. And they also have bony ridges, which are called cranial ridges. You can see that they look like very skeletal, whereas frogs look very slimy, beautiful kind of, while as toads are sober looking individuals. But these are for our convenience we have done, but at molecular level, if you look at the sequences, frogs, and you cannot make a distinction between frog and a toad kind of.
Okay, so I think we should conclude now. It's we already overshot, and Gururaja, thank you so much. And I just want to make one point, because you said about citizen science, the frog watch. So could you please say that how the participants of this workshop can contribute into the frog watch program? So yeah,
perfectly.
How do we
take
contribute?
probably 30 seconds. People who have smartphones and all, you need not do anything apart from taking a picture. And there is a website called India Biodiversity Portal, which is under Creative Commons licensing. Your photograph and your data will be in your name. So you can upload those photographs that you have taken, and there are moderators who will identify the species for you. you are contributing to a larger cause of conservation, because we don't know many of these distribution of common species itself. Forget about endemic species. We don't even know where skittering frog is distributed. We don't even know where common toads are located. So your contribution by taking a picture and uploading on India Biodiversity Portal is a great contribution in conservation. And this is simple to do. Just go to indiabiodiversityportal.org. You will be able to do this.
Perfect. I'm going to contribute. I'm sure most of the listeners are going to contribute to. Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Gururaja, for coming and accepting my invitation. And yes, we are privileged to have you here.
Thank you.
And yes.
Thank you, Guru Raja. It was really nice interaction with you, and we always appreciate you. And if we will get a chance, we will invite you in our center university.
Perfect. I'm more than happy to come and talk. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
So next in this talk series is by Dr. Kailash Chandra. He is the director of the ZSI, Zoological Survey of India, and he is going to talk on animal diversity right after the tea break. Right now it's a tea break. I'm sorry we cannot serve you, so I suggest all of the participants to help yourself a cup of nice tea or coffee, go to your kitchen, and then back here at 5 o'clock. So we have just 30 minutes, less than 30 minutes, in fact, not 25 minutes. So yeah, we will see you again within the next 25 minutes. Goodbye all.
Yeah. So you are going for a cup of tea or not?